Hi everyone. Please subscribe to the channel. I really appreciate it. Thank you. So in regard to why there's so much turbulence in the world right now, we're all familiar with the current chaos in the US through the way the Trump administration is doing things. But then we have an ongoing war in Ukraine that seems to be getting nastier by the day, in large measure because the US is sort of pretending to be on Ukraine's side, but really because of the current president, Russia is getting away with a lot more than they normally would be able to get away with. And then there is the increase of hostilities in the Israel-Iran conflict, and in the background there's still the Israel-Gaza situation. So things are pretty dicey right now, and the best astrological explanation is through the energy, well, not all of the energy, but important parts of that energy through the Saturn-Neptune cycles currently being in Aries. And really I would point to the Neptune as being the most important, in that it has a much bigger orbit, so that it was last year in the 1860s. It's a 165-year orbit, because Saturn is 30 years, so Saturn was in Aries in the late 90s, mid to late 90s, and there were conflicts then in the world. And so in that sense, it reflects that pattern somewhat. You go back another 30 years, and you find it in the late 60s when things were also fairly turbulent. But this is a level up. It's something that is reflected in not just the fact that there are wars at the moment, but also the overall tenor of the situation, such that there's a military buildup, really practically almost everywhere. China for sure, Israel no question, but now you have Europe in response to the, you could call it abandonment by the US of their usual position in NATO, and so countries are arming, and this is reflected, or you could say mirrored, through what was going on in the 1860s, when, just like now, the world was in a similar phase. In my research, I noticed that the decades leading up to the 1860s, meaning the 30s, 40s, and 50s of that century, were not nearly as militant. Then in the 1860s, not just in the US, which experienced its civil war from 1861 to 1865, but in fact throughout the whole world, multiple countries were arming and becoming more belligerent, more warlike, and then the effect diminished by the 1870s. And this is essentially the Neptune cycle through Aries. Now, of course, it's true that by all accounts, you could call it the maximum misuse of Neptune energy, but human beings can be like that. Neptune on the high end is the most spiritual, most peaceful seeking planet. So the excuse then becomes, well, we're going to war because we want to make peace, which of course is nuts, since war is war and peace is when there is no war. But the point being, though, that Neptune on the high end is the most spiritual, most tranquil, peaceful energy, but as it descends, still on a high level, but now becoming more dangerous, it becomes the faculty of imagination, of ideology toward some ideal state, which under the best conditions would be peace, but it can be hijacked and turned into an ideology, in this case of war. And there's where Aries as a sign doesn't help, because Aries is probably among the 12 signs the most military. It's literally the sign of war and militaristic action. It's ruled by Mars. You notice, for example, in the astrology lexicon, firemen, policemen, military people, and Aries go really well together. So this is why, and in this sense, I think we, bottom line, to some extent or to a major extent, we have to get used to it because it's not going away anytime soon. Now, I am confident that the 4 years we're in pretty much mirror, really almost precisely, the Civil War period of the 1860s, and we're living it, at least for now, and let's hope it stays this way, minus some incidents we've seen already that are actually very reflective of war conditions, like this nut job that killed 2 Democratic Congress people in Minnesota. But overall, it's been more of a Cold War environment, and this is what we have to make sure it remains as, and do everything in our power to resolve the current differences, which are pretty intense, through the electoral process, which, by the way, has been going, in my opinion, as expected, in the sense that this happened during the Orange Maniac's first term. As soon as he entered office, all the elections were going to Democrats by numbers greater than expected. And this time around, exactly the same thing, although even more intense, because back then he was disliked, and now he's even more disliked. And so that's why the reaction is even bigger. And noting the statistics, apparently since he has been in office the second time, elections have gone to Democrats by 16.5 points above average in the results, which is pretty high. Indeed, the latest one happened either a day ago or 2 days ago in a district that Kamala Harris had won by 19 points. The Democrat won by 69 points, which is a much bigger margin. And this is a pattern that you see in politics all the time. The party that is in power tends to then experience more losses, but the danger to their tenure comes when the losses they're experiencing are much bigger than normal. And so this is where we're headed electorally as we go into later this year and then into next year, and especially into the midterm elections. I realize, of course, that there are people that will say, yes, that may be true, but Trump and his minions will make sure that either that election doesn't happen or that they'll try to do some kind of cheating to win anyway. I disagree, and I primarily disagree because of the astrology. If I'm using this as a model, and believe me, I do, then, no pun intended, for me it trumps everything. You can't say this guy in 2026 is experiencing heavy Saturn restrictive action, and so are many of his cabinet people, and they can get around that just by cheating. It doesn't work that way. If the planets say so, then that's it. That's the final statement. And I should also add that this assumes that he is then at the time fit to lead the party, because that's not altogether clear to me from the vantage point of the health aspects that he is currently navigating through. And it's curious that, as an example, yesterday he left, according to the accepted news feed, he left the G7 conference in order to come back to the White House because of the Iran-Israel conflict and some story around that. But there was some important background reporting saying that this wasn't the reason. The reason is that he's having a heck of a time staying awake and coherent whenever he is in public or he's in some situation where his faculties are called upon to respond. Translation, he may not be doing very well from the health perspective. And so then there is no guarantee that he is there in 2026 to actually be leading the party. But if he is, then his aspects are very poor. And that's what I think we have to focus on during this period of time, even while we have to accept that we are in a swath of time that is quite disharmonious. And it's disharmonious everywhere as the world adapts. I mentioned Neptune and Aries from the militaristic viewpoint, and that's certainly true. The other key planet is also Uranus, in that in the Civil War period of the 1860s, the Second World War period, and now again in the current period, is returning to where it was discovered back in the 1780s, and then it went back there in the Second World War period, and now it's back there again. And this planet is notorious for also upending things on its way to bringing about a new order in the world. And in all cases, you're grappling with new technologies, new ways of doing things that tend to dramatically shift the way society operates. This, of course, would have been true near its discovery, because that was the birth of the Industrial Revolution. And then in the Second World War period was the atomic age. And now we are dealing with the incoming AI revolution.